The first question to kick off with really is, what is head of digital stores at Marks & Spencer's mean?
What does it mean? It means a whole world of interesting stuff. So I sit in the middle of a rather interesting Venn. So we have on the one side our large retail operations organisation, our large enterprise IT org, and then our new Wizzy digital org here. And I kind of sit in the middle of those three spheres as the advocate of what we do for our customers and our colleagues in store with digital devices and the digital experience more generally.
Fantastic. So, digital in-store has been a theme for a while now. Lots of retailers at different levels of engagement and sort of forays into what that means. One of the most common things we hear is, well, we've got digital in-store, we've got iPads, or we've got a cheaper version of iPads if we're not as committed. So I think, what does the digital store experience mean for Marks & Spencer's? What does that represent for your customers?
So I think the thing that we are very aware of is the fact that when people come into our stores, they're making an active choice to come and have a physical experience. That doesn't mean that we ignore the digital, but we need to be respectful of the fact that they've made a choice to come in and interact with people in a physical sense. It's very easy to put lots of Wizzy tech and lots of digital signage, iPads on sticks, all this kind of stuff, and try and distract people away from the fundamental, enduring need for human contact. So for us in M&S, we really try and make the digital experience something that's complementary to the physical one. So rather than directing people over to self-ordering points, we'll have a customer assistant with a device in the hand that will enable them to enhance that physical experience. So I'd say it's really around that complementary piece, something that's subtle and non-invasive, rather than being sort of lots of Wizzy tech that actually becomes a little bit dissonant to people when they come into a store.
And do you find it hard to resist some of that Wizzy tech?
Yeah, I think so. As an organisation, it's very easy to go out and find lots of really cool stuff and think, actually, wouldn't it be marvellous if we had a really big screen that would allow people to do self-service ordering in store? Whereas for a customer proposition for someone like M&S, that's probably not as relevant as maybe for other customers. The long screwdriver, I think, is familiar to a lot of us in tech, where we get somebody saying, actually, I saw this great piece of tech in a trade show. We'd love to get that across all of our stores. And what we do is we tend to try and incubate some of that stuff. So we have a specific retail labs function that will go and trial that stuff in a few stores, see if it actually does resonate with our customers, and then look to scale it out from there.
Fantastic. So, one of the things you touched on early there was around the store colleague engagement. And that's certainly, one of the biggest barriers to overcome in retailing is the sort of where digital has come out of digital departments, often a silo in and of themselves. And then suddenly sort of release the gates are open and digital is everywhere. And stores sort of quite often are the recipients of that technology, whether they've asked for it or not. So I'm interested in sort of how did you, as part of that program, and certainly in your role with One Foot in Digital and One Foot in Store, how did you overcome sort of some of those cultural barriers to make sure that store experience worked from a digital perspective?
I think you nailed it with a lot of the use of language there, which is about imposition and around actually implementing this stuff into stores. So we've recently implemented a new colleague device across our entire estate. And what we have traditionally done, as I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are familiar with, is we'll go through a very serious beauty parade with lots of very, very big vendors and go out and do a big RFP and build an amazing business case and then dutifully release this across our entire estate. We took a slightly different approach and we went into our stores with a selection of devices, actually consumer devices to start with, and look at some of the problems and challenges they have in store and how those devices fitted into their working life. And over the period of the last 18 months, 2 years, we've actually narrowed that down to a single device, and now we're working with our store colleagues to work out what applications need to go on there. So rather than doing a pure lift and shift of what we did previously, we're looking at the way that colleagues would like to use these applications in store. And because it's been colleague up, and we've been very, very open about the process. We have Yammer channels. We go out and engage with stores. They've actually been extremely positive about it. And we have a steering committee with our retail leadership team where I'm constantly being told, okay, so what's the negative about what's going on? So what are the stores really saying? And we're showing videos of people saying, this is the best thing ever. It's improving my life. Just look at, just trying to find a negative comment back from our source has been really difficult, and that's because we've brought them along the journey from day one.
Yeah.
Now, I suspect if we'd given them the same device with the same applications in a very waterfall way, we'd have found a lot more resistance because people just don't feel emotionally attached to the product that they're working with.
So would you, sort of building on that slightly, would you say that the delivery methodology and adopting Agile with a small a, principles and approaches, rather than trying to work digital and physical in a waterfall way, is sort of the key to that?
Well, it certainly worked for us in this instance. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a cookie cutter that you'd apply to everything. Something like POS, for example, I think would be quite difficult to do in an agile way. But certainly for staff enablement and customer-facing things, I think Agile has worked brilliantly for us. I'm a bit of an agile nut. I've been doing it since it was called DSDM.
Agile with a big A then.
Agile with a big A, but actually very cognizant of the fact that agility doesn't mean you do things without process. In fact, in the startups I've been in some of the less successful startups, we've really tried to be agile and not really focused in on some of the process or being respectful of the fact that we need to wrap things in a way that's repeatable and measurable. And that was one of the things we did very effectively with this new device, was not just adopt a sort of lean agile approach, but also very, very careful about the KPIs and the ways and the means that we were measuring and how we held ourselves up for failure. So we had a number of things that we had some pretty big assumptions about. Some of these devices early on, we had them absolutely nailed on. They were going to succeed, and ultimately our store colleagues said, no, these aren't good enough, and we failed fast with those. We could easily have gone out and just selected that device earlier.
And so I'm going to lead on to a question we discussed previously around that, which was a nice phrase around how do you fail fast with pride? Is that?
That's right. Yeah.
So fail fast is a great concept.
Yeah.
Often organisations don't like the failure part of it, but also, failure itself can actually put a bit of a dampener on a programme. So nice concept in isolation, but actually can lead to the wrong cultural shift. So
I think that word failure is such a pejorative term, and it carries such emotion with it. It's actually, in some ways, if you think about the scientific model, if you try 30 different experiments and only one of them succeeds, you consider that to be a successful scientific endeavour. However, in the commercial world, if we try 30 things and only one of those things succeeds, we consider to ourselves to have failed at 29 things. So that concept of failing fast is less around thinking of it as a failure, as something where we haven't succeeded, but we've succeeded in not investing in something that potentially could have cost us a huge amount of cash. So in the example of the digital device that we're working on, we could have dutifully gone out and chosen a really great device that we thought was right, spend millions of pounds implementing it in stores, and it could have flopped. It could have cost us millions of pounds to do that. Whereas we went in, we failed with a few things, admittedly. There were a few things that didn't go as expected, but we're quite honest with ourselves and saying those were things that we learned from and actually came up with a success in the end. So focusing on the success and being honest about the failures as well.
And so you mentioned lean there and sort of part of that startup mentality. So the things like sort of moving quickly, testing and learning, engaging the full team, all absolutely, great ways to move forward in digital. Not normally heard of from businesses as big and established as Marks and Spencer's, far more associated with the Ubers and the Facebooks and the Googles of this world. So sort of culturally, sort of from, I suppose, more of a senior management and stakeholder perspective, what's that journey been like in terms of getting some of those cultural shifts in place?
It's been really, you're right, it's been really interesting and far less resistance than you would have expected. In fact, really no resistance. It's been more a sort of passionate curiosity. This is something you find a lot in M&S, is people are very, very passionate about the brand, they're very passionate about the organisation. And when they see something that comes in that can allow us to operate at velocity, that allows us to do something without having to invest huge amounts of cash, people are generally very receptive to it. The critical part of making that success is drawing the picture very carefully. And being, as I said earlier, not just talking around agility in terms of, we're going to do lots of stuff, we're going to fail lots of stuff, but eventually we'll get to the right answer. But actually saying there is a process around this. This isn't just the Wild West. This isn't just mayhem where we let developers go off and build 30 different tech stacks in 20 different ways. We actually will wrap that in a sensible project management process. We will have roadmaps. We will have things that we can tangibly describe to you that fit into your strategic needs. So it's about bringing those two worlds together. I think one of the interesting challenges we have as organisations is bringing in millennials who are used to working in a very agile and very liberated way into organisations that have, in our case, 33 million customers that we need to serve every year, and being cognizant of the fact that unlike a .com, we can't burn 10,000 customers in our first 6 months. We have to be respectful of the fact that we have a large operating environment. So some of those challenges are still being worked out, and I think
Yeah.
every business that's on that agile transformation will recognise that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to hear that those challenges are being embraced rather than resisted.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it makes much smoother road ahead. So sort of in terms of the Wild West and the developers going off and developing 30 things at once, how do you control what ideas generate an initiative or a pilot? What's the process that you go through?
I think part of that is, I guess, it's less around control and being really respectful of the fact that there are people who have a different way of working now coming into the workplace, and allowing environments for those people to do those things. So we have a certain amount of our time that we call innovation time that we give to our developers to try stuff out. We have a number of stores across our estate where we allow people to be a little less rigid in our due diligence when it goes into stores. So within those stores, we may have 30 or 40 different experiments going on over a period of a year. Some of those things I said probably aren't going to be scalable or even received well into our wider estate. But what we tend to find is some of those things will start spawning smaller changes.
Yeah.
An interesting one recently was around our change to doing our trading safely and legally diligence to our stores. So we had a whole range of paper processes that we were dutifully filling out across our estate, and it was taking us a lot of time. The actual compliance was difficult to prove. However, what we found was by introducing some of these applications onto our new digital device and putting that into the hands of our store colleagues, that they were then able to go out and do a whole range of other things like gap scanning at the same time as doing a TSL check. And that was all built in a completely different set of technology from the one that would have been selected and dutifully built in.
Yeah.
And had we, I think, tried to build that on our original tech stack, it would take us months to get anywhere. But because we spun something quickly up in Heroku and had these really smart, passionate developers going out and speaking to people in stores, we actually got something out into our estate within a few months rather than potentially a few years, which I think it would have taken us otherwise.
Makes a difference. And how broadly do you go looking for ideas? So do you have any idea generation schemes within M&S to get the wider perspectives?
Really don't need to go looking for ideas. I mean, our challenge is actually working out.
Absolutely.
I think the challenge is find the overarching themes of things that really fit into what we want to be doing as a business. I think clearly things like operational efficiency. So we have a great community of in-store colleagues who are very, very vocal and yammer about things that aren't working for them personally. And I have a team of people who work both in-store and in the office who will go out, a bit like I kind of call them hunter-killers, who'll go out and find those themes. And we'll bring those back in-house and work with our retail business unit to find out whether they are something that we're looking at strategically, whether they're things that are known issues, and I guess work out that whole priority list.
And within that, perfect. So I suppose within that, sort of getting lots of ideas from different places and then them federating out to lots of different channels. How do you sort of manage that understanding of who the customer is? Probably less from a single customer view perspective or from a data perspective, but more from who you're designing for. Who's the end goal for this proposition? Do you have a sense of that within the projects that you're...
We do. I mean, there's a couple of real soundbites that we try to use as product people. The first one is the intent that nobody leaves our store disappointed. Okay. And when we have a product, it needs to fit into either intent. The intention will be that it improves the probability of an awesome customer experience. The other element would be around us ensuring that we are continuing to be able to do the basics. So are we able to trade? Is it helping us to trade safely and legally? Is it allowing us to free up time for our colleagues to spend with customers? I think increasingly that second piece is becoming more and more important. We talk about digital enablement, but really what's the end game here? For us, it's really around freeing up time from our backstage operations and from that sort of heads down retailing, which you see a lot of in stores, to allowing people to stand up and look around and actually scan the shop floor and behave like shopkeepers.
Yeah. And so we've talked about some of the innovations earlier. We were discussing magic mirrors as sort of one of the innovations you might look at. So one of the questions is, it's a lot of these things sound great in principle. They get written up a lot. They get a lot of PR column inches, probably in internet retailing. But when it actually comes to driving the business case and justifying which ones to go after, how do you manage that process? Because when they're put up against not just a sort of single digital implementation, but with 500 plus stores, trying to get a digital idea federated out to 500 stores and thousands of colleagues, the magnitude must get quite big quite quickly.
Yeah, and I think the trick is not to try and boil the ocean. So the idea is to take a very, very iterative approach. So we'll start out with something normally just in one store, test the idea, do a very lightweight minimum viable product. It may even be something as simple as a paper prototype back in a lab, just to get a feel for whether we have something that would physically work. Then we'll go out into stores and we'll measure and iterate very, very quickly in those early days to see if we have something that would potentially work in 2 or 3 stores. Then we'll test in 2 or 3 and see how that goes, and then we'll probably we normally go to 8 or 9 after that. Yeah. Then we start then we're really talking about, particularly in M&S's case, a product that's impacting potentially multi-million pounds worth of turnover, and that's when I start dealing much more with our enterprise IT colleagues, saying what are the tech stacks we need to work with, what are the some of the basics around infrastructure in stores, what are the out-of-hour support that we need to put into this? Because even if we're trialing something, we need to be very, very respectful of the fact that these are trading environments. We can't just go in, as you would with a small startup, and say, actually, we know we're going to annoy a few thousand customers, but that's okay. Yeah. So yeah, kind of start small and don't go small, medium, large. Go small and kind of iterate out in a spiral and try and grow those things incrementally. And again, don't be scared of saying, actually, we've got to this point, but it's probably not going to scale, or it's just not making the business case, or we've taken it as far as we have, we've learned a great deal of stuff, now we're going to stop it. Yeah,
yeah. And there's definitely sort of, I think, that really interesting description of that spiral. I think it's a very common, when we sort of get the opportunity to incubate, it's then becomes something quite precious, and the only way to take it is forward.
Well, people get what I call the ugly baby syndrome. So you get really, really attached to this thing, and as it grows, you get more and more attached. It gets more and more beautiful to you, and nobody wants to hear they've got an ugly baby. And you'll do everything that you can to look at the KPIs to try and make them work for you. Yeah. I think the larger the organisation, the bigger the prize. That tends to be more and more of a problem. So you try and say, actually, this is going to make us £10 million. We know we're only proving that we can make 5,000 by going to the next 3 stores. But that sort of jam tomorrow conversation of actually, if you give us a little more time, being very, very honest with yourself, particularly as product people, as tech people, saying, actually, this isn't going to work, but we know there's something else that might.
Yeah. Brilliant. So ugly babies, not the way forward. So on that note, I'm going to open it up to the floor for any questions at this point. So there's a chap over there. Have we got a microphone? Okay.
Have you or are you, how have you unlocked an efficient challenge of business technology kind of separation? Normally, all the money's with technology, that's where they're spending, that's what people are doing it, therefore, typically, technology organisations control the decision making, the government, all kind of things that come with that. Have you done anything different to kind of unlock the power of the two rather than being led by technology?
Yeah, and this is something we're working on at the moment. So we've implemented what we call our digital council, so where people have an idea, now be that somebody who's an in-store colleague or is a technology leader, they need to fill in what we call an ideas canvas, which is a single pager, which just describes what they're trying to do. And it has a number of the obvious things, what is it, how are you going to measure it, what are your KPIs, is it a strategic fit? But really the critical piece of that is how are you going to test this? And how does that, and what are you looking to spend on it? And what we're trying to get to a place is where we're stopping ourselves getting involved in sort of 5, 10, 50 million pound projects and saying, what we'd like to do is test this for £10,000 and then come back and prove that business case in a scaled way. Our IT team are very keen to get on board with what we're calling our agile transformation, and part of that is going to be around being a lot more flexible and lean around that ideas generation. The bigger challenge is, and I think this is for the more traditional retailers, is all that legacy stuff that we just have to kind of do. And if anybody has an idea about how to fix that, I'm open to suggestions. I think some of that is just going to have to continue to be waterfall as those underpinning technologies start getting broken up into more service-oriented architectures and into things that are able to be more abstracted away from those big heavyweight. So in some cases, mainframe systems and we've even got COBOL systems in M&S still running. So as some of that stuff gets migrated into more modern technology stacks, then we can start doing a little more sort of lean, agile business cases. But at the moment, I think it's kind of hang on for a bit and wait for the tech stacks to naturally get migrated. And I think the mindset will change then as people start being able to do stuff in smaller iterations.
Perfect. So it's slightly reassuring to hear you've got the same legacy system problems as everybody else in the room as well.
Yeah, everybody I speak to from technology, I think, and it's natural because we've come from such a world where we've had to be very protective of our customer base. We're not startups, and I hear this a lot in organizations, not just in M&S, but other large organizations that I've worked with. There's this feeling, oh, we want to be like a startup, we want to be like a startup. Guys, you really don't want to be like a startup. I've been there, it's hard work, you fail a lot. You'd kill to have the customers and the data that businesses like M&S have. Be respectful of the fact that you've got these legacy systems, and kind of it isn't great, but really look forward to the great stuff that you're able to do, on the fact that you've got these enormous data lakes, you've got all these customers who are willing to tell you stuff. Yeah.
Excellent. So our next question. No, oh, sorry, Catherine.
Hello, there we go. Talking about business cases, you mentioned that obviously each particular item you want to do has a business case, but if I step back from it a little bit, how do you justify to CFOs the business case of creating a department that can basically turn around and say, we may iterate and deliver something, but over time you may not get to see a return on investment? So, I mean, I think I completely agree. I'm agile in terms of background and delivery, but I have that constant trying to get buy-in from people who are used to building a store and would never go about the route of saying, we're going to build a cart first, then we're going to build a store, I'm going to put doors on it next week, and then we're going to put lights in, and then we're going to pull the plug. Because a lot of the kind of traditional retailers just don't get that. So how do you build that business case that says, we're going to innovate, but it's going to cost you, and I can't really tell you how much it's going to cost or what you're going to get?
Yeah, I guess there's two elements there. The first bit is around not applying agile to everything. There are some places where you really want to not be agile. So one of my previous roles was with the European Space Agency on Ariane. You really don't want to be putting a rocket up into space using agile. So, oh, well, you've got 2 foot off the floor. Well, great, that's £6 million. Let's go and invest 12 for the next 3 feet. So I think there's some of that, and I think store opening is a great example of this. With the CFO conversation, again, it comes back to, if you are looking at doing something small and agile, around saying, actually, we're not looking to spend 5 million today to solve this problem. We're looking to spend £5,000 to prove whether we have a solution for it. I know Helen, our CFO, is very, very amenable to this. What she finds frustrating is when people are coming in and promising the moon on a stick, and then 5 years later, you're saying, well, actually, all that stuff we thought that was right kind of wasn't. So it's about, I guess it's horses for courses, right? So if you've got something small that you think you would like to scale out, be honest about it and say, we'd like to spend 5,000 now. Maybe in 6 months' time we'll come back for 10,000, but that 5,000, we might just lose it and have learned something from it.
Perfect. So for our next question, come on, be brave. Oh. Also, it's quite difficult to see you all with the lights. So.
Question I have is, at what point do you determine whether one size fits all? Because you've got a huge estate, huge organisation. Do you at one point say this is right for some and not for others?
Ooh, would you have an example of something?
Well, if I think of a small format M&S store versus the mega centre in Oxford Street, where do you balance that?
So I guess we've tried to avoid having a one-size-fits-all solution. I think in some areas you do have to just be pragmatic when you're a large organisation. You don't want to have 30 different POS systems or 5 or 6 different types of device. The idea is to choose technologies that are morphable into different environments. So the example I would have would be our new Honeywell device. Now that's as relevant for somebody working in a small Simply Foods who has a range of applications on it that's relevant for their particular format, as it is for somebody who's working in a clothing to home department in Bluewater, say. So I don't think there is necessarily an enormous trade-off. I think at times there is a level of pragmatism we have to have in that a big business like M&S is probably only going to have one POS, it's probably only going to have one ordering system. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, it's more about the fact that you want to move quickly, so do you roll something out to the larger stores and then find that you actually need to change it for the smaller stores? I think you've covered it.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to go back to my questions whilst you all think of your next ones. So one of the things you mentioned was sort of solving problems. So for the business, problems that are sort of clear and present, how can we use the digital store experience to drive towards that. And at the other end, there's more of a sort of innovation edge, and sort of, especially within digital retail, quite a pressure to be seen to be cutting edge and trying new things. And I wonder sort of for yourself and for your role within Marks & Spencer's, where that balance sits between the projects you'll be working on needing to be more fundamental in terms of supporting day-to-day business and not annoying those 5,000 customers in a week, versus actually showing a little bit of being on the front foot, trying some of those things that are a bit edgier.
Right. I mean, I guess for the day-to-day sort of running of the organisation, we try and do that. We try and make that a priority. For me, the headline stuff is keeping the lights on. So when we look at our priority list of things, it's about, can we trade safely and legally? Is the store environment somewhere where we would like our customers, or we ourselves like to go into? When it talks about more cutting edge stuff, we tend to defer that to our innovation team. Okay. So we use a specific labs team with a specific set of skills around prototyping, around going out and doing the walking the boards at conventions to find the next cutting edge stuff. So really, the challenge is then how we bring that stuff from the labs into the retail estate. Again, that comes back to being clear about how you're measuring it, what problem is it looking to solve. And at the head of every sort of product on a page that we have is what is the problem you're looking to solve. So what is the individual thing or group of things that you're looking to solve for a customer with this piece of technology. If that's vague or doesn't have a set of valuable KPI against it, it gets very short shrift.
So we're not going to see the launch of Oculus Rift shopping for M&S just yet.
Well, interestingly, last year we did release our furniture with a virtual reality capability, and that was massively well received in stores. And we're looking maybe at doing some similar stuff in the future. Will we see that in every single format of every single store? Probably not.
Okay, excellent. So throwing it back open to the room. Any further questions from the floor? Seriously? Perfect. This chap here at the front. Be brave.
Thank you. It's a direct question for Richard, just in terms of you're relatively new to Marks & Spencer's. For me, very refreshing. Agile doesn't really come across as traditionally Marks & Spencer's. You know, it took them quite a while to get the website to where everyone else was at, maybe 2 years after. How your experience in the last year, and how are you changing that mentality so that you can actually be on the front foot as opposed to following the competition?
I think M&S is actually a really innovative organisation. You look at the number of patents it holds for its clothing and the amazing food it does. So I think across the organisation as a whole, it is very, very agile. And we have some very smart people that are in the business now who come from agile backgrounds. Our new director of digital has come in from Apple. So we're actually building a really great cohort of individuals with a huge amount of experience of agile. And when I talk to the people in our retail BU, and I mentioned this earlier, they're really keen to embrace this. I think as a mindset, it's kind of there, but we are such an organisation that some of that actually gravitating out to what you see as customers maybe taking a little bit longer. But if you see some of the changes, I think since Steve Rowe came in as CEO just recently, there's an enormous change. You walk into an M&S store now, it looks and feels very, very different. And the approach there has been, we're agile not just in principle of our software development, but also in the way that we operate as a business. So we tend to be looking more at small, simpler changes and focusing really in on what our customers are telling us. So actually it's not been that difficult, to be honest. I think painting the picture and drawing out the value to an organisation who's very used to doing 5-year plans, that's something that we're still trying to crack.
And so I think one of the areas of real interest within that context is, how do you measure success? So if you're redefining the ways of working across both agile but also the store format, digital measures itself very differently to stores. And again, you have the role of bringing the two together. So how do you measure success and to drive the right behaviours?
Yeah, I mean, that is a fundamental challenge. I'm coming from a pure .com background where you measure everything. You'll have a really clear picture of what your funnel is. You have a really clear understanding of what your conversion is, to where we'll have people who may start their purchase journey on a mobile phone, may then go into a store for a bit of consideration, may then go back onto a tablet device, then ultimately go back in store and ordering it. Drawing that picture up is a real challenge. We're beginning to get better at it as we start investing in things like data science and pulling apart our enormous data lake. If we're talking about specific measures within my team, the things I like to measure my team on are NPS and CSAT. So really, what is it that what's the visceral impact it has been on customers in store? Going in, we do a lot of surveying. We spend a lot of time actually talking to customers and finding out the qualitative side of what we're doing.
Yeah, yeah. So revolutionising that part.
Yeah,
as well.
kind of, yeah.
Fantastic. So time for, I think, one more question from the floor, if we have anything. If not, we'll close the session. Brilliant. Right. Well, oh, sorry.
Okay. I just wanted to find out a little bit more about virtual reality and augmented reality plans for M&S. I know that you sort of started to talk about them a little bit. Just wondering a bit more.
So that fits into the area of our really... The question was about augmented reality and virtual reality and how would that fit into M&S's plans. I guess for us, it's probably not a clear strategy for us at the moment. It's not something we'd necessarily look to go after specifically. We know we're trying a few things in that area. We did our virtual reality release with the furniture last year, which was well received. I think as I mentioned at the head of the conversation, things like that need to be really complementary and really subtle in stores. If it just looks like a bit of a gimmick, people are pretty smart. They'll kind of be interested maybe once or twice and not come back. So I guess the interesting thing for us is finding out from our customers how they would use that in their everyday life. And I think this is a continuing theme across technology generally. So we're seeing the consumer space is much more informative now of the business world, where maybe sort of 10, 15 years ago it would be large organizations that would then push out commercial bits of tech into the consumer world. That's kind of flipped on its head now. So we're seeing things like, you know, Pokemon Go. Everybody was running around in our labs trying to work out how we could do something similar and something interesting.
Sure they weren't just finding Pokemon?
Yeah, I think so. They wear T-shirts, have long hair and stuff. They're an interesting breed. But we all had really great conversations about how augmented reality could possibly work in M&S. And we haven't yet found anything specific, but we're happy to hear from people who think we might do.
Fantastic. Brilliant. So on that note, please join me in thanking Richard for his time and for your sharing your insights today.